Alright, this is going to be the Digestive System, Chapter 16, and this is going to be Part 2. We're going to talk about the stomach in this section, gastric walls, peptic ulcers, regulation of gastric activity, and stomach cancer. The stomach is located in the left upper quadrant of the abdominal pelvic cavity, receives food from the esophagus, and it has four functions: temporary storage of ingested food, mechanical breakdown of ingested food, breakdown of chemical bonds in food items through acids and enzymes, and production of intrinsic factor, a compound necessary for the absorption of B12. Ingested materials mix with secretions of the glands of the stomach and these are highly acidic. The substance is called chyme whenever it gets to this area. It has four main regions: the cardia, the fundus, the body, the pylorus, and then we're going to talk about the pyloric sphincter. The cardia is what the esophagus connects to, and it's the smallest part of the stomach. The fundus, the bulge of the stomach superior to the cardia. The body, large area between the curve and the J of the stomach, and then the pylorus, the distal part of the J shape, and then the pyloric sphincter regulates the amount of chyme between the stomach and the small intestine. And here is the cardia. There's your diaphragm, the fundus, the body. This is the pylorus. And you see all these wrinkles inside here? This is a blow up of these wrinkles. And essentially we get, these are called gastric pits. And down here, this is a blow up here in the gastric pit. We have parietal cells and chief cells, and these are going to be important here in just a second. We also have endocrine cells that are at various locations that secrete various endocrine enzymes and secretions. So muscularis mucosa, the submucosa here, the muscles of the actual stomach, circular muscle and the longitudinal muscle, and then we have the serosa, or the covering, its version of a viscera. The gastric walls, gastric pits, shallow depressions in the stomach walls. Gastric glands and gastric pits communicate to gastric glands, and these things secrete about 1,500 milliliters of gastric juices a day. Gastric juices are the cells that produce gastric juice, are parietal and chief cells. Parietal cells secrete intrinsic factor and hydrochloric acid. And intrinsic factor facilitates the absorption of vitamin B12 across the intestinal lining, and it also has a pH of about 1.5 to 2. Now, the normal pH of the body is 7.35 to 7.45. So this is highly acidic. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen in the stomach lumen, and then when the pepsinogen comes into contact with the hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells, it turns into pepsin, and pepsin is a protein digestive enzyme that starts breaking down protein. So, quick review here, one more time, that we started breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth with salivary amylase, and we started breaking down proteins in the actual stomach with the help of the parietal and the chief cells. And this is the same picture. So, these are our parietal and our chief cells down in the gastric pits of our stomach. Just thinking right now before we get to the next slides and start talking about this, what do you think would happen if you get a high amount of hydrochloric acid up into the esophagus? And that's what we're going to talk about as far as like heartburn and things like that. Now, peptic ulcers are a little bit different, that it will erode the actual walls of the stomach itself. Which brings us to our clinical note: peptic ulcers. Erosion caused by gastric acid can occur anywhere in the GI tract. So we can actually get this in the stomach, we can get this past the stomach. they pretty much discovered a recent bacteria called Heliobacteria pylori. Occurs in about 80% of the gastric and duodenal ulcers that are found. That they actually have this bacteria that is causing or compounding the damage that is actually done to the stomach tissue. And these are gastric ulcers. These would be opening or ulcerations in the actual intestinal lining. Peptic ulcer disease. Heliobacteria. Regulation of gastric activity occurs in 3 phases. We have a cephalic phase, we have a gastric phase, and then an intestinal phase. Cephalic phase is, and most everyone has experienced this, the sight and smell of food prepares the stomach to receive food, or it can actually start churning the stomach and churning up some of that acid and make us feel hungry, or stomach would growl. The gastric phase, the arrival of the food in the stomach, stimulates parietal and chief cells whenever it enters into the stomach. And then we have the intestinal phase. Begin when chyme enters into the small intestine and provides regulatory controls, because whenever the chyme enters into the intestine, we don't want the stomach acid secretions to continue at that point. And this is figure 610 in your book, that sight, smell, and taste, central nervous system, all of this is preparing to fire up. So mucous cells, chief cells, and parietal cells are stimulated. And step 2 are the gastric phase, to where we get distension, elevated pH from the secretion of the chief cells and parietal cells, and gastrin is released. When gastrin is released at the point that the chyme gets to this point, the gastrin is released, and it's inhibitory, and pretty much decreases the mixing waves and decreases the chief cells and parietal cells. At the point that the presence that we get a release from, or what we're going to learn later in the gallbladder, we get inhibitory even more of the chief cells and parietal cells and stop peristalsis, or movement in the stomach, so that the peristalsis takes over from the small intestine and continues on. Clinical notes: stomach cancer, responsible for about 12,000 deaths a year. Surgical removal is probably the best choice. If you do not have the intrinsic factor by the chief cells and the parietal cells in the stomach, your protein intake declines, and you do not have the ability to break down B12. And this is a normal stomach by endoscopy. And this is a stomach that is suffering from stomach cancer. Clearly evident here that there's some damage and abnormal cell growth, from nice smooth mucosa to this. Small intestines. Clinical notes we're going to talk about is an upper GI bleed, the intestinal walls, intestinal secretions, vomiting, and digestion in the small intestine. The small intestine has 3 parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The 3 parts equal about 20 feet. The duodenum receives chyme from the stomach and lies outside the peritoneal cavity in the retroperitoneal area. Organs posterior to the peritoneal cavity are called retroperitoneal. Jejunum, where the duodenum re-enters the peritoneal cavity, and this is supported by a sheet of mesentery. And then we have the ileum, which is the longest part, about 12 feet. Ileocecal valve sphincter controls material from the ileum to the cecum, which is the first portion of the large intestine. So the ileocecal valve is what controls the movement of the bolus of food into the actual large intestine. And this is the duodenum, the area in blue, and it's going to be in the retroperitoneal area. The next part is we have the jejunum, and these are plica, which we'll see here in just a second. They allow for more surface space, just like the lungs had surface space as well. And then we have the ileum, which are about right here would be the ileocecal valve. And the ileum, there's approximately about 12 foot of it. It would be the largest portion of the small intestine. Upper GI bleeds, caused by peptic ulcer disease, those ulcerations that we saw earlier, gastritis, or inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract, and then variceal rupture, or a Mallory-Weiss tear, which is a Mallory-Weiss tear is essentially a laceration in the esophagus. Esophagitis or duodenitis can also cause peptic ulcer or upper GI bleeds. Mortality is highest in patients over 60 years old, and I found a picture actually. These are Mallory-Weiss tears in the esophagus, and these have been cauterized. So this right here is a Mallory-Weiss tear. The intestinal wall, plica, serves as a series of transverse folds is the plica. The villi, multitude of finger-like projections, help move the food and apply surface area for absorption. And lacteal, nerve endings and lymphatic capillaries that are actually in these finger-like projections. So as we're looking at this, this is the small intestine, and these little upright portions are the plica that we saw earlier. And all of these have little hair-like projections on them called the villi. And this is a blow-up. First of all, this is a cross-section here. We have the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, all the muscles, and this one little thing right here, and the inside of this is considered a lacteal, and this is where we actually have lymphatic vessels, and we have blood supply that essentially moves the nutrients into our bodies. Intestinal movements. Gastroenteric reflex caused by gastric distension pretty much accelerates gastric secretions and increases peristaltic activity. This is whenever you would have a full belly, let's move this stuff out, is what the signaling that's occurring. And gastroileal reflex, response to gastrin levels, pushes material into the small intestine. Now, gastrin levels would occur whenever the chyme reaches the actual small intestine. And we essentially get about a 5-hour time limit from the duodenum, and that's where it leaves the stomach, to the ileum. Intestinal secretions, intestinal juices. Fluid arrives by osmosis and flows out of the mucosa. Hormonal and CNS control and regulation of these secretions of the digestive tract is what occurs. Clinical note, vomiting, forceful emptying of the stomach and intestinal contents through the mouth. We didn't need probably to be told that. Most everyone has had a vomiting episode. Digestion in the small intestine. Food becomes saturated with gastric juices and exposed to the digestive effects of hydrochloric acid and pepsin. And these are coming from the actual stomach. Simple sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids are absorbed along with most of the water contents in the small intestine. Most enzymes and buffers are contributed by the liver and the pancreas. And we get kind of a feedback system here. So food enters into the stomach, and we get the red arrows are stimulation, and the blue are, whoa, 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 let's inhibit this. So food in the stomach, gastrin release, increase acid and mobility, so let's start churning this and get it to where it needs to be. Chyme enters the duodenum, which at the point that it enters the duodenum, the gallbladder has its secretion. You have more secretion occurring from the pancreas, and more enzymes and buffers are added as well from the pancreas. The islets of Langerhans have a completely different job. They're the endocrine part of the pancreas, which gives us an insulin release, which allows us to move sugar into the cell if needed, and allows us to absorb nutrients. The pancreas. We're going to look at histological organization, the control of pancreatic secretions, and then pancreatitis. Pancreas lies behind the stomach and extends laterally from the duodenum towards the spleen. So if the stomach, on this, the J point was here, the pancreas would be right underneath it in this area here. Histological organization, we have the pancreatic islets, and these are the endocrine portion. We have pancreatic juice, and this would be the digestive portion. Mixture of digestive enzymes and buffers. And the pancreatic islets, I didn't go talk about this, but they secrete insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. Not specifically in the order that they come in. Alpha cells secrete glucagon, beta cells secrete insulin, and delta cells secrete somatostatin. Break apart chains of glucose is the glucagon's job. Insulin allows it into the cell, and somatostatin would be the negative feedback system once enough new sugar has been produced. Pancreatic juices, mixture of digestive enzymes and buffers, and these assist us in breaking down nucleic acids and all sorts of things. Pancreatic duct carries secretions into the duodenum, and this duct is going to be shared by two other organs. Pancreatic enzymes do most of the digestive work, and they're classified towards their intended targets. And these are all going to be ACEs, carbohydrases, which are sugars, lipases, which are fats, nucleases, which are nucleic acids, and proteases, which are proteins. And these are all enzymes that are going to be secreted by the pancreas. Cannot live without your pancreas. The control of pancreatic secretions. You have about 1,000 mils a day of secretions that occur from the pancreas, controlled by the hormones of the duodenum. And these will either give it a positive feedback or a negative feedback system. So this is your abdominal aorta and your stomach, and your pancreas is lying just behind your stomach. They share a common bile duct, which we'll see here in just a little bit. So at the point the chyme enters into here, the pancreas gets information that, hey, I just had a bolus of food enter the small intestine. Whenever the duodenum enters back into the peritoneal cavity, that's when the pancreatic juices are secreted. Those juices then will start breaking down more on sugars, proteins, nucleic acids, and fats. Clinical note on pancreatitis. Inflammation of the pancreas. The number one cause of this is the common bile duct has a stone in it. So the three organs that share the common bile duct, which is liver, gallbladder, and pancreas, have a stone in here, and you get a backup of secretions. That backup of secretions inflames not only the gallbladder and can give us cholecystitis, but it can also give us pancreatitis as well. Those juices will inflame the pancreas and cause damage to it. The liver. Anatomy of the liver. We're going to do a clinical note over portal hypertension, hepatic abscesses, liver functions, liver transplant, and then hepatitis. The liver is the largest visceral organ, divided into 4 unequal lobes, left, right, caudate, and quadrate lobes. Tough connective tissue marks the division between the left and right lobes, which is the falciform ligament, my apologies, and that would be this right here. The liver secretes bile, which is stored in the gallbladder. Inferior vena cava, left hepatic vein. As the liver filters, so the portal circulation system all filters through the liver. And once it's through filtering and detoxifying, it'll actually enter into the inferior vena cava and be pulled back through the circulatory system. Anatomy of the liver. Liver lobes, functional units of the liver, hepatocytes, individual liver cells, and then we have Kupffer cells, which are phagocytic cells of the liver. They kind of act like white blood cells. And this is liver cells here. This is the portal area, the portal circulation area. Connective tissue kind of holding it all together. These right here are hepatocytes. These are going to be the Kupffer cells, which are phagocytic. You have a bile duct here, and all of this circulatory input into the liver for detoxification, including blood supply to the liver for oxygenation. Clinical note, portal hypertension, caused by things that would impede or obstruct flow in the liver, and the common cause on this is a cirrhotic liver. It is a very fatty liver, or a liver with high fat content, or hepatitis. Long-term portal hypertension causes varices, and that's because the entire mesentery, or the entire intestines, the veins will actually engorge and become backed up. So it'll decrease circulatory flow through the liver. This can cause ascites or third space fluid shifting in the peritoneal cavity, splenomegaly or enlarged spleen, hepatic encephalopathy. Now, this is caused from high ammonia levels. Ammonia will alter your mental status. So if you have byproducts that you cannot eliminate because of your liver is failing or your liver is in failure of some sort, and your ammonia levels rise, those ammonia levels can give you an altered mentation or altered mental status. And this is a picture, figure 1617, of a normal liver. And this is a cirrhotic liver. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the difference between those two. Nice, dark, and normal liver tissue. Big time abnormal liver tissue, or cirrhotic liver. Hepatic abscesses. I've actually found these on the internet. So they're abscesses of the liver. The most common cause is an amoeba in non-industrialized countries. In the U.S., it's pretty much a result from a surgical procedure in the biliary tract or the gallbladder. You get an amoeba in there, and it can cause abscesses of the liver. So this guy over here is the amoeba. And what it essentially does is it causes abscesses, if you can kind of spot all these, on the liver. And this one here has multiple abscesses. This liver, I promise you, is failing or is in failure. Liver functions. Metabolic regulation. The primary organ involved in regulating the composition of the circulating blood, and that's the liver's functions. Hematological regulation, largest blood reservoir in the body. 25% of the cardiac output is run actually through the liver or is stored or in the liver at any given point. Production of bile consists of water, ions, and bilirubin. And bile does one thing for us. It emulsifies fat. So if you kind of think of it as Dawn dishwater, it will emulsify or help us break down fats. Clinical note, liver transplant. Patients in liver failure will die within hours or days if their liver goes into failure. May be harvested from a live suitable donor, so they can actually take just a part of the liver. The liver will regenerate in about 6 to 8 weeks, but you have to have an adequate amount of liver competency in the transplantee to actually even attempt this, because for 6 or 8 weeks while it is repairing itself, liver functions will decline. If they're almost in failure or in failure at that point, they probably won't make it the 6 to 8 weeks for the liver to fully function. Clinical note, hepatitis, inflammation of the liver, and viruses commonly cause this. Now, most of y'all don't know, you've heard of hepatitis B and hepatitis C, but there are alternate strains of this. There's D, E, F, and G. As the virus mutates, it becomes tougher and tougher, and the mutation of the virus makes it more and more elusive. We only have a vaccine up to hepatitis B at this point. Byproducts of this, or of an inflamed liver, is going to be ammonia, and this can cause hepatic encephalopathy. The encephalopathy is your diseased brain, essentially, is what that encephalopathy means. And it will alter your mentation. This is a liver in the book, figure 1619, that has hepatitis. And I actually found a picture on the internet. This is a real liver with hepatitis. So they look like they have pustules pretty much all over the liver or the organ. The gallbladder. We'll talk about a clinical note, biliary, colic, and cholecystitis. The gallbladder, hollow muscular organ, pear-shaped, and stores a concentrated bile prior to the excretion in the small intestine. So this thing stores bile from its bile is produced by the liver. Hepato-pancreatic sphincter, sphincter in the common bile duct, when relaxed, will release bile into the small intestine. And CCK, or cholecystokinin, in the presence of chyme in the duodenum, The duodenum, it'll relax the hepatopancreatic sphincter and release bile into the small intestine. So this allows cholecystokinin is what is the trigger for the gallbladder to release its bile into the small intestine. And this is liver, this is gallbladder, bile duct, pancreatic duct. So all of this comes out of the common bile duct. So remember whenever I said earlier, and this is kind of a blow up of this, if we get a stone in this location that clogs it up, that it will give us gallbladder attack and may also give us pancreatitis. Clinical note: biliary colic and cholecystitis. Inflammation of the gallbladder. Common cause is a gallstone, and this is going to give us a specific type of pain. Acute pain in the right upper quadrant, vomiting, tenderness in the right costal margin. So anything in the right costal area, just underneath the ribs, is actually going to be painful and tender to touch, and this is called a Murphy sign. And this is another picture. Gallbladder, bile secretion from the liver, sphincter of Oddi, common bile duct. This ends part 2. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My name is Roy Smith, 405-219-7613, or smithr@imsa.net. Thank you.